The recently ended government shutdown was in itself a source of a stream of good news. In addition to shutdown-related news, we're going to talk about feminist lunacy being exposed, about the aftermath of the Covington Catholic High School scandal, and about a recent court decision which I don't even know if it's good news or not. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Good News video, episode 7, I think. Alrighty, so after 4 episodes of in a row of pure unadulterated insanity, all just from this year, as the tradition goes on this channel, I gotta compensate with some good news, usually at least 50% of the insanity being put out. Luckily, there's been a lot of very good things happening since the new year, so it's easy to put out 2 episodes of the Good News video. In fact, I may even have enough material for 3 episodes. We'll see. Alright, let's dive in. The first one is from the end of last year, but it's still current news as of the moment of this recording. Via NPR, Violence Against Women Act expires because of government shutdown. The partial shutdown of the US government, which is affecting more than 800,000 federal workers and numerous government agencies, also has consequences for the Violence Against Women Act, which expired at midnight on Friday. Separately, both the House and the Senate passed spending deals that included clauses that would have extended VAWA until February the 8th. But because the law's future became inextricably tied to the larger budget debate, which hinges on a dispute between Democrats and Republicans over funding for a border wall, it was not reauthorized. VAWA funds and administers numerous programs assisting survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. That's a lie, by the way, or a partial truth. Its expiration does not prevent all of these programs from being administered. According to the Washington Post, grants already awarded under the law will not be affected, but future payment requests from programs that receive VAWA funding will be delayed until the law is reauthorized. According to roll call, the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services administer most VAWA programming. Some VAWA programs that HHS administers may continue to receive funding even though VAWA expirations have expired. Congress approved fiscal 2019 funding for HHS in September, but funding for the Department of Justice is tied to the current budget debate. In a letter she sent to House Speaker Paul Ryan in September, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi criticized Republicans for only pursuing short-term reauthorization of VAWA. When the act was set to expire earlier this year on September the 30th, it was extended until December the 7th, and before it expired on December the 7th, it was once again extended by a short-term bill. That extension ran out on December the 21st as the government went into its partial shutdown. In her letter, Pelosi references a bill introduced by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat from Texas, in July. The bill extends and expands VAWA, introducing additional measures that prohibit the sale of firearms to people subject to protection orders and to persons convicted of stalking. Yeah, that's probably unconstitutional. Roll Call reported earlier this month that the gun-related clauses were the likely reason no Republicans supported Jackson Lee's bill. It was never brought to the House floor. In September, 46 House Republicans signed a letter addressed to House Speaker Paul Ryan and Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, urging them to reauthorize VAWA. This is not a partisan issue, the letter says. VAWA has been continually reauthorized on a bipartisan basis in Congress. Yeah, that's not a reason to continue to be bipartisan, isn't it? We must act now to maintain and strengthen this critical law. Yeah, no. The letter did not encourage the adoption of a specific bill. The last time VAWA was reauthorized was in 2013, and it took a bit of political battle. As NPR's Eder Peralta reported, some Republicans took issue with provisions that offered new protections for Native women and lesbian, gay and bisexual and trannies. The Violence Against Women Act was first passed in 1994 by a Congress with an unprecedented number of women. Most of the women who served in that Congress were elected in 1992, the year after Anita Hill testified before Congress during Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearing, close quote. Alright, so here's why this is good news. Now, I've been in the podcast celebrating the previous shutdown of VAWA back in 2013, and I remember saying then, I think it was on Robert O'Hara's podcast, or maybe mine, I don't know, but I did say it at the time, that the 2013 battle was just the beginning, and it will take about 10 years to make VAWA a distinct partisan issue. Why? Because that's how much I estimated at the time that it will take until we get enough politicians woke on the feminist question and the institutionalized misandry that VAWA truly represents. At the time, of course, many laughed and said it's not possible, but I was basically saying that non-leftists should do exactly what the left had done back in the 1980s. This NPR article says that VAWA was first passed in 1994, following the election of more women in Congress in 1992. Now that is a mischaracterization. It was not the number of women in Congress that mattered. The number of women in 1992 Congress was not significantly higher than the 1988 or 1984 Congress. What did change was the number of far-left partisans who got elected. And that happened because about 10 years earlier, enough far-left partisans had gotten themselves into universities and got to school and prepare a new generation of politicians and activists. Now, one of those activists was Anita Hill, mentioned in the NPR story, who was and still is today a far-left propagandist specialized in agitprop for feminist causes. Of course, the NPR would never say this because the NPR is in the same team with Anita Hill and all the rest of the propagandists who make VAWA possible to begin with. Now, at the time, that is in 1994, conservatives, especially conservative politicians, were still supremely dumb and unwoke on these things, much more than now for sure. And they seriously believed that they were voting for a bill that would protect innocent women. They were wrong. And this is the portion where the NPR essentially lies through omission when it says, where it is, quote, VAWA funds and administers numerous programs assisting survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, close quote. Yeah, not really. That accounts for about 10% of the activity funded. It's like with Planned Parenthood, who doctor their numbers to seem that they're not in fact a tool of genocide, but rather just another healthcare provider. Same goes with the VAWA racket, whose primary purpose is perpetual employment for militant far-left feminists. The secondary purpose is the subversion of as many institutions as possible, with activists that were taught institutional manipulation by the militant feminists whose paycheck comes from the government via VAWA programs. Now, most of the programs actually dealing with domestic violence are funded by the states, not through federal VAWA programs. And it's a whole can of worms anyway, since many of the VAWA-funded centers are more in the business of manipulating the family courts than helping the victims, who oftentimes don't even exist. It's a false allegations credentialism mill, essentially. Anyway, long story short, more of these things are now coming to be known by a lot more politicians and a lot more conservatives than ever in history. As a result, we're getting closer to making it a partisan issue, as indeed it should be. VAWA, as currently written, should not be voted by any Republican at all. It runs contrary to basic decency and not to mention conservative principles. So, will the Violence Against Women Act stay shut down throughout 2019? Nope. It will eventually get reauthorized, I suspect next month after another government shutdown, but unlike 2013, now it is even more partisan, which is a good thing. What should be aimed at right now is to keep it in a short term, just like in 2013. This makes sure that there will be another fight for it again in due time. By that moment, if non-leftists keep it up with getting people woke on the feminist fraud, it will be even harder to get it reauthorized. I know, it's hard. And common sense would dictate that the whole bill should be thrown out of the window or helicoptered into the ocean, but this is how these things get done. It took them almost 20 years from when they decided that they wanted this bill until they got it passed. We started pushing back only in 2008 or 2009, and in 2013 it was already partisan. So we're moving faster than they did, but it cannot be done faster than this is done right now. It is what it is. Alrighty, next, coming from the Sun. Professor uses feminist buzzwords to get entire passage from Hitler's Mein Kampf published in academic journal. Quote, a professor is facing the sack after using feminist buzzwords to get an entire passage from Hitler's Mein Kampf published in an academic journal. Peter Boghossian helped create a series of spoof academic papers to satirize a number of fields, including what he describes as the grievance studies, including fields on gender, obesity, and homosexuality. The assistant philosophy professor at Portland State University in Oregon penned a total of 20 intentionally broken and nonsense papers with the help of 2 collaborators. Each of one was deliberately ridiculous, but astonishingly 7 were accepted by peer-reviewed journals, the Times reports. 1. Our struggle is my struggle, solidarity feminism as an intersectional reply to neoliberal and choice feminism, was a rewrite of chapter 12 of Hitler's 1925 autobiography with feminist buzzwords switched in. All the spoofs featured very shoddy methodologies, including incredibly implausible statistics, as well as ideologically motivated qualitative analysis and claims not warranted by the data, so basic feminism. Further bizarre passages includes one published under the fake name Helen Wilson in the journal Gender, Place and Culture, owned by Taylor and Francis, a British publisher. This was supposedly an investigation of the rape-condoning spaces of hegemonic masculinity and had involved examining 10,000 dogs' genitals in public dog walking parks. The paper suggested that men should be trained like canines to prevent rape culture. Another wrote, it is suspicious that men rarely anally self-penetrate using sex toys, and that this is probably due to fear of being thought homosexual, homohysteria, and bigotry against trans people. Actually, this argument was already made in mainstream feminism, and it was made in all seriousness. I made a video about it, I think it was 4 years ago. It's a legit train of thought in the LGBT QWERTY circles. Now, Professor Boghossian is really out of touch here with the craziness. Anyway, back to the article. Where was it? Yeah, Dr. Boghossian and his colleagues said they were stunned by how easily the joke papers were published. We wanted to see if these disciplines that we called grievance studies are compromised by political activism that allows for the laundering of prejudices and opinions into something that gets treated as knowledge, he says. World-renowned scientist and atheist Richard Dawkins was one of the number of leading academics to write to the university in support of Boghossian, saying that his first response to the brilliant hoax was to let out a howl of incredulous mirth. Do your humorless colleagues who brought this action want Portland State to become the laughing stock of the academic world, he wrote, or at least the world of serious scientific scholarship uncontaminated by pretentious charlatans of exactly the kind Dr. Boghossian and his colleagues were satirizing. A student of Boghossian's, Austin Holmberg, added, quote, I firmly believe that Peter's actions are extremely valuable in that they have made crystal clear the disheartening corruption in pseudo-scholarship that has taken a foothold in academia. We know that arbitrary and potentially harmful ideas will be welcomed with open arms by some of today's scholars if they are made politically fashionable. An official for Portland State University said that Dr. Boghossian had studied human research subjects without proper ethical approvals, the Times reports. A further charge regarding the falsification of data is under review, close quote. Of course, they complain it didn't have the proper approvals, because that's what academia is today and has been For decades now, a bunch of bureaucrats who distribute a license to speak and engage in intellectual inquiry. That's why I said back in 2016, and I fully do stand by that statement, that we should abandon universities. They are, for all intents and purposes, completely useless. It's hard to imagine a more useless pursuit than a university degree at this point. Even watching porn is marginally more useful. At the very least, it is less harmful than going to the university, especially in the humanities. Now, we know this and have been knowing it for years. A few academics have been knowing it as well, but for many years, this piece of information was not public knowledge. This is why we saw so many leftist academics so angry when the Lindsay Shepherd scandal started, or even earlier in 2015-16 when suddenly many higher education publications started publishing really nervous and tepid articles because leftist academics had been accustomed to nobody questioning them, least of all the plebs and the working class whom they view with complete and utter contempt anyway. But slowly, things have started to change and a division emerged as well. The more people became aware of these problems, the more it became clear that there will be two positions to take. One is the position that I advocate, namely to abandon traditional universities and form new centers of thought, knowledge and wisdom, either online, as private clubs, or as independent think tanks, or any combination of these, or even come up with a new model that is not yet known, or it is known to only to few people. The other position, however, is to fight from the inside for reform. Dr. Boghosian is of that position for now, though of course the empire strikes back, so he might in the end be kicked out and from the inner circle of academics, and then that said inner circle will try to forget the incident. Well, forget until it happens again, basically. Both approaches need to be practiced. It's not an either-or type of approach. And this is the overall good news, that both are being practiced and are finally starting to show some success. As Terence Pope would say, winning! Now, of course, it will take time until this whole corruption gets where it deserves, namely in the dustbin of history, but then again the university model, the way we know it today, needed more than 50 years until it became the established norm. And by that I mean the universities as bureaucratic institutions, because of course universities as a degree issuing institutions have been of course around for thousands of years. Anyway, let's go further. Radio Telefís Éireann, which is the state broadcaster in the Republic of Ireland, Trump administration lowers status of EU diplomats in the US. I'm just loving this way too much. US President Donald Trump's administration has lowered the status of the European Union's diplomats in Washington without notifying Brussels, EU officials have said. The change in protocol for a close US ally means the bloc's Washington-based diplomats are less likely to be invited to high-profile events and have a lower importance than under former President Barack Obama. The snub, first reported by German broadcaster Deutsche Welle, was illustrated at the December 5th funeral of former US President George H.W. Bush, when Europe's envoy was among the last diplomats to be called to pay respects, one EU official said. Two other EU diplomats confirmed the downgrade, with one saying it was unlikely the bloc would retaliate given its desire for good relations. Deutsche Welle also reported that the diplomatic rank of Irishman David O'Sullivan, the EU's ambassador to Washington, has been reinstated. An EU official told Deutsche Welle that at Mr. Bush's funeral, as diplomats gathered in Washington to pay their respects, Mr. O'Sullivan was not called up in the usual chronological order from the longest serving to the newest ambassador. Mr. O'Sullivan was instead called up as the last person. Before the demotion, Mr. O'Sullivan would have been ranked among the first 20 or 30 ambassadors of the more than 150 foreign representatives sent to Washington, D.C. US diplomats in Brussels were not immediately available for comment. Mr. Trump has often shown his disdain for the EU and has backed Britain's planned departure from the bloc. But the US and the EU have the world's biggest bilateral trade ties, and US investment in the bloc is 3 times higher than in Asia, according to EU data. While the shift does not stop senior EU officials from meeting US counterparts, it follows a tumultuous year for transatlantic ties. Mr. Trump withdrew from several international agreements backed by the EU and vowed to reform the liberal international order he says the bloc helps underpin. In a speech in Brussels in December, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Mr. Trump's America First policy was reshaping the post-World War II system on the basis of sovereign states, not multilateral institutions. He also took aim at bureaucrats responsible for upholding multilateralism as an end in itself and cast doubt on the EU's commitment to its citizens, drawing a rare rebuke from the European Commission. Close quote. This is good stuff. I mean, minor and less obvious, but very good stuff. Now, let's be clear. This particular action, demoting EU diplomats, in diplomatic terms, is a friendly slap on the face to remind the opposition of who is in charge. Also, it signals, once again, that the policy of bilateralism and not multilateral conglomerate is the one being favored. What this means in practice is that the EU's importance on the global stage has just diminished just a little bit. But more importantly, the EU's model has lost quite a bit, because other diplomats from other places are looking and then are taking notes. So for instance, if the African Union is considering going on the same path as the EU and start delegating continent-wide diplomats, now they're less likely to consider that. Or if the ASEAN organization was considering it, now they're considering it less adamantly. These are the finesse things that are rarely discussed in the media because most people don't understand them anyway, even though it's these things that form the basic infrastructure over which geopolitics and international policy is being formed. Now, why is this the case? Because personal trust and institutional trust between the diplomat class is the most important aspect, or at the very least one of the most important ones. So yeah, good on Donald Trump for doing this. The EU is not a country and should thus be treated in diplomatic terms under the etc. category, and not in equal or heaven forbid superior terms with sovereign nations. Alrighty, staying in the US, TSA workers are now quitting because of the government shutdown, union says, from Yahoo News. Some Transportation Security Administration employees are quitting their jobs as the partial government shutdown continues through its 3rd week, leaving more than 800,000 federal employees without a paycheck. The American Federation of Government Employees, the largest union of federal employees representing about 44,000 TSA workers, says some TSA employees have resigned and others are considering quitting after working one of the busiest air travel periods for the year without pay. Every day I'm getting calls from my members about their extreme financial hardship and need for a paycheck, said Hydrick Thomas, the union's TSA council president, in a statement. Some of them have already quit and many are considering quitting the federal workforce because of the shutdown. It's unclear exactly how many TSA employees have left their jobs since the partial shutdown began on December the 22nd, but a number of workers have described the financial burden the shutdown has thrust upon them, as many depend on each paycheck to make ends meet. TSA employees are some of the lowest paid federal workers, and in interviews with Money last week, current employees said they are delaying car and insurance payments and worried about paying rent and childcare during this shutdown. Employees also said morale among co-workers has hit a new low. That's a good thing. As far as we're concerned, a lot of us still live paycheck to paycheck, Victor Payas, a TSA officer based in LA, who represents his colleagues in the union, told the Money Channel last week. It's hard to plan a budget for these types of crises for any extended period of time. TSA employees have also been reportedly calling out sick, a trend dubbed the blue flu, regarding the color of their uniforms, to find other ways to make cash to better manage their bills, as CNN first reported on Friday. Michael Bilello, a representative with TSA, said in a tweet Wednesday morning that the agency's data does not indicate a spike in resignations for its officers. There was also a 5% rate of unscheduled absences on Tuesday, a slight bump from a 3.9% rate on January 8, 2018, when there was no shutdown. The union has argued that the shutdown and loss in TSA officers could create a massive security risk for travelers in US airports. Bilello said in a tweet Wednesday that security standards will not and have not been compromised. Representatives from the TSA and the AFGE did not respond immediately to requests for comment, close quote, and then the article goes on and on and on to include a lot more whining from the unions. Who cares? Now, in all honesty, this would be an even better piece of news if the shutdown had lasted even more. So much so that the TSA would have simply been depleted of workers. And no, I'm sorry, the TSA shouldn't exist at all. Their existence is one of the dumbest things the Bush administration has done, if not the dumbest thing. In addition to being unconstitutional, the only thing the TSA does right is to be the fucking Stasi, or the closest thing to a Stasi that America can have. It was and is quite spectacular to see Democrats and the media, but I repeat myself, suddenly being concerned with the fate of the moochers who work for the TSA when just 8 months ago, in May 2018, the media was all over the TSA accusing them of being authoritarian thugs, which they are, and largely useless overall, which they are. New Jersey Democrat Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman was complaining, rightfully so I might add, about the TSA's habit of maintaining blacklists of everyone who is in the business of questioning the legality of this over-bloated bureaucracy. Also in May, the Los Angeles Times was calling the TSA one of the most incompetent agencies on earth, which, upon personal experience with the TSA, I will have to agree with them. I interacted with them 3 times during my US tour last year. 2 of those were supremely negative experiences. One of them wanted to confiscate my Albanian lighter literally for no reason. Luckily, I had read their procedures beforehand and lawyered my way out of it, but still, it shouldn't be the case that I'd have to read hundreds of pages of legalese just so I can hop into a plane with all my stuff intact. It's insane. So yeah, to read about resignations due to the government shutdown is awesome news, because crap character tends to correlate with an inability to manage money in a decent manner. So as a result, I'm hoping that some of the crappiest people resigned, though I will never be fully satisfied until the TSA is declared unconstitutional, which it is, and duly disbanded and thrown into the dustbin where it belongs. Oh, and please don't give me that crap about more security. There is no security. At best, there is a comfortable illusion of security. They don't even check the IDs properly. At the Ronald Reagan Airport in DC back in June, the lady there tasked to check my ID didn't even look at my passport, let alone confront whether it matches my boarding pass or indeed if I were in the US legally or not. So whose security is guaranteed more precisely? Definitely not the security of the American people and the legal residents. Maybe they mean the security of their own jobs. That I'm sure it is insured quite a bit, but not by much, since their own freaking union doesn't have a strike fund to help its members. So I wonder why they even pay the dues to begin with. Whatever, this is a good news video, so I won't get into that. But I will say I am glad they suffered, and I hope they suffer more in the next shutdown. One less TSE employee is one step in the right direction for normal people. Alrighty, let's talk a little bit about the assault smirk. I really loved this scandal. I mean, sure, it's terrible. These kids got a horrific treatment by the media and by the Democrats, but I repeat myself. But at least now they know how the far left really functions. It's a great life lesson that perhaps in a tamer manner should be taught to all 15-year-olds. Anyway, aside from that, the Covington Catholic scandal generated a tremendous amount of good news and almost as many memes as the midterms. And that's quite an accomplishment in and of itself. Competing in memetics with an election campaign is quite hard. Coming from the Wrap, Vulture writer who wished death on Covington students fired from job at INE Entertainment. Digital company INE Entertainment has fired a journalist who publicly wished for the death of several Covington Catholic high school students and their parents in a pair of tweets over the weekend. Aside from his job as a post-production supervisor at INE, Eric Abris is a contributor to New York media's pop culture site Vulture. We were surprised and upset to see the inflammatory and offensive rhetoric used on Eric Abris' Twitter account this weekend. He worked with the company in our post-production department and never as a writer, the company said in a statement to The Wrap on Monday. While we appreciated his work, it is clear that he is no longer aligned with our company's core values of respect and tolerance. Therefore, as of January the 21st, 2019, we have severe ties with Abris, close quote. Good! Now, there's more to this. CJ Pearson, or Pearson, I guess it's the pronunciation, he's a black conservative kid whom I've been following since he was like 12 or something like that, has secured funding for a class action lawsuit and is now maintaining lists with every single piece of shit that calls itself a journalist that denigrated these kids. I mean, I get it. These kids were mostly white, all-male, Catholic, and Republican. That makes them a priori evil in the eyes of the left. But guess what? It is high time for the left to pay personally, not just institutionally, for their bigotry. So I'm glad to finally see non-leftists taking up the Alinsky tactic of going after people and not institutions. Also, I'm hearing that some of the layoffs at BuzzFeed and HuffPo had something to do with their behavior in this scandal. Now, don't get me wrong, layoffs would have happened anyway, but some of those fired were last-minute decisions and the last-minute additions to the list because of the damage they've done to the brands in question. So yeah, good news all around. From now on, we just have to wait longer until we'll see the results of the lawsuits, but I'm sure that will be glorious too. Now, while I'm hoping that what I'm hoping is that this becomes the standard operating procedure on the non-left, and in fact there are signs that it is indeed becoming slowly the standard operating procedure to drag these lowlives in court for the trash that they produce, which is good. That's exactly how it should be done. Alrighty, next, coming via, what website is this? Birmingham Mail. Muslim moms protest outside school for promoting homosexuality to their kids. Yes, please. A group of angry moms have launched a protest and petition against their school for introducing a curriculum supporting homosexuality. Andrew Moffat, MBE, assistant head teacher at Parkfield Community School in Saltley, has been criticized by parents for piloting No Outsiders, a program run alongside sex and relationship education lessons. Its ethos promotes LGBT equality and challenges homophobia in primary schools. Books now being read by pupils at Parkfield Community School include Mommy, Mama and Me and King and King, stories about same-sex relationships and marriages. But Mr. Moffat and the No Outsiders program have come under fire from some Muslim parents who condemn such teachings as homosexuality is strictly haram in Islam. Mr. Moffat, who is openly gay, and the school have defended the program, which they said had been fully explained to parents. They added, No Outsiders allows us to raise awareness of these differences so that children are able to tolerate and accept differences in our society. But outraged mom Fatima Shah, who has taken her 10-year-old daughter out of the school, told Birmingham Live it's inappropriate, totally wrong. Children are being taught it's okay to be gay, yet 98% of the children at this school are Muslim. It's a Muslim community. I've taken my daughter out and other parents have too. Enough is enough. Sex relationship education is being taught without our consent. We've not been informed about what's being taught. Mr. Moffat is running what's called CHIPS, Challenging Homophobia in Primary School, and it's totally against Islamic beliefs. My child came home and told me, am I okay to be a boy? It's confusing children about sexuality. I want my children to learn about English, maths and science. I'm keeping my daughter away from the school until something is done. I've been paying £20 an hour tuition at home instead. And while Mrs. Schoch is against LGBT equality being taught at Parkfield, the 29-year-old insists gay people should be treated with mutual respect. Speaking alongside other Muslim parents outside the school gates, the mom of three added, "We believe in fundamental British values and believe gay people should be treated with mutual respect and without prejudice or discrimination, just like any other human being. We respect the Equality Act and believe it can be implemented without the promotion of homosexuality. Children have a naive and innocent picture of sexual relationships. At this age, it is inappropriate to teach them what is a gay or straight relationship. The school knew the local community and parents have a different set of family values and morals and were opposed to an LGBT agenda that says being gay is okay. Our community ethos was not respected. We feel betrayed by the school." Others who spoke to Birmingham Live outside Parkfield Community School included mom of two Mariam Ahmed. The 34-year-old, who has helped organize the petition calling for change, said, "No outsiders is not for our community. We have a different ethos." Mr. Moffat is over-promoting LGBT movements. I have nothing against him and I fully respect his beliefs, but this should be stopped being taught in schools. It's not necessary and it's confusing the children. My little girl is 4. She's in reception and she came home asking me if it's okay to be a boy instead of a girl and has dressed up in her brother's clothes. She's 4 years old. Mohammed Saqib, aged 37, who has children aged 8, 9 and 10 at Parkfield Community School, added, "I respect all religions, but why should sexuality be taught to primary school-age children? It is out of control." Mr. Moffat seems a friendly and good-natured guy, but he needs to respect us as Muslim parents. He needs to listen. Another mom who has children aged 7 and 11 at Parkfield Community School added, "Why does my 7-year-old girl need to be taught about same-sex marriages and homosexuality? She should be playing, having fun, and should be learning about English and mathematics. This curriculum is putting ideas into their heads." Close quote, and on like that the article goes. It's a pretty lengthy one and I urge you to read it because it's glorious. Now, this situation is good news on so many levels. First of all, because the parents are entirely correct. The Challenge Homophobia in Primary Schools program is complete and utter garbage. It's a primary school, for crying out loud. Kids aren't even at puberty yet. They don't have an opinion on this, negative or positive. Just leave them kids alone, you fucking perverts. Second of all, it's good news because the Muslims are making very reasonable arguments, especially the father, Mr. Mariam Ahmed, I think, whatever, who is describing the gender confusion of the 4-year-old daughter. That is a very serious discussion. While the New York Times, a former newspaper, has been busy lately to shill for the transgenderist lobby and claim that more and more teenagers suddenly feeling transgenders is not a fad, the fact of the matter is that it absolutely is a fad, but also a phenomenon that in specialized literature is called behavior contagion or social contagion in more common parlance. And part of that social contagion is because of programs like these, whose effect is to create gender confusion among children, whether intentional or not. But perhaps the most important aspect for why this is good news is because now it's Muslims who are opposing it. Under intersectionality, Muslims are the most oppressed, so you can't just write them off as privileged homophobes just as easily as the activists have done when the Christians and the Jews complained. This is a very good opportunity in propaganda terms, so save up the link and quietly drop it every time a progressive speaks about this and make the progressive take a position on this issue. If they side with the school, then call the progressive an Islamophobe, and if you can, smear him with that label amongst his friends and collaborators. If he sides with the Muslims, then call him a homophobe and file a complaint with the appropriate authorities. Basically, make them live up to their own book of rules. Use this case to divide the left, because it must be done. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Just saying. Now I have added this link to the library section of our website, so you'll be having it there whenever you need it. So seriously, check out the library on freedomalternative.com. Alrighty, let's see, time is okay. Okay, let me squeeze one more in this episode. Coming from Reuters. Yeah, this one. Politicians cannot block social media foes, U.S. appeals court. A federal appeals court said on Monday a Virginia politician violated the Constitution by temporarily blocking a critic from her Facebook page, a decision that could affect President Donald Trump's appeal from a similar ruling in New York. In a 3-0 decision, the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said Phyllis Randall, chair of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, violated the First Amendment free speech rights of Brian Davison by banning him for 12 hours from her Chair Phyllis J. Randall page. The ban came after Davison had attended a 2016 town hall meeting and then, under his Facebook profile, Virginia SGP, accused school board members and their relatives of corruption and conflicts of interest. Randall had also removed her original post and all comments, including Davison's. Circuit Judge James Wynn rejected Randall's argument that her Facebook page was a private website, saying the interactive component was a public forum and that she engaged in illegal viewpoint discrimination. Davison's speech occupies the core of the protection afforded by the First Amendment, Judge Wynn wrote. The decision by the Richmond, Virginia-based appeals court upheld a 2017 ruling by U.S. District Judge James Caceres in Alexandria. A lawyer for Randall did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Katie Fallow, a lawyer for the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, which represented Davison, said public officials have no greater license to suppress dissent online than they do offline. Lower courts have disagreed over whether government officials' social media pages are public forums. Davison's case was the first of its kind at the federal appellate level, and other courts could cite it as precedent. In one case, also brought by the Knight Institute, Trump has asked the Second U.S. Court of Appeals in Manhattan to overturn a May 2018 ruling by U.S. District Judge Naomi Reese Buchwald that he could not block Twitter critics from his @RealDonaldTrump account. The Department of Justice, which represents Trump, has called Buchwald's decision fundamentally misconceived. It has said the president uses the Twitter account in his personal capacity to disseminate his views, not to offer a platform for public discussion, and it is not required under the First Amendment to receive messages he does not want to hear. Trump set up the account in 2009 and has more than 57 million followers. Oral argument on his appeal has not been scheduled. The case is Davison v. Randall from the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. So, first of all, in my humble opinion, this is unlikely to apply to Trump's case because Trump blocked people on @RealDonaldTrump and not on the @POTUS account, which, where it might actually apply. But on a broader note, this could be significant because if similar cases make their way all the way up to the Supreme Court, that might put SCOTUS in the position to rule whether social media is a public square in the sense of a utility or not. Given how long these cases take to get there, there is plenty of time for all of us to find out whether both efficient and sufficient alternatives can indeed be created. I don't know the answer to that, and nobody does as of yet. The theory says it can be possible, and early science shows that the theory still applies even on the internet. But will it apply in due time? I don't know, and you don't know either. That's why I've stayed away from the argument about regulating social media as utilities, because it's nowhere near as simple as many try to make it. With that said, I would shit my pants if I were Facebook or Twitter. Because the long-term consequences of such a shift in legal thinking can be devastating for the cozy model that Facebook in particular has built for itself. So in that regard, this is good news. But generally, I don't know whether it's good news or not. I'll have to spend more time thinking about this. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll be taping another episode of this, or should I say at least another episode, because there's plenty of good news in the agitation, propaganda, and especially subversion front. But until then, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. Please do consider throwing a shekel my way should you derive any value from the work being done here. Don't forget to visit the website for more regular updates, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.